Our debt to the great Queen of Castile and Leon is hard to measure, but in any case, it is phenomenal. This remarkable woman was possessed of some of the finest qualities that we can be proud of as being characteristic of our great white race. Even as a child she was endowed with a serene self-possession and had a majestic presence. This was not surprising, perhaps, considering that she was descended from Alfred the Great, William the Conqueror, the Plantagenet kings of England, St. Louis, King of France, and St. Fernando, King of Castile. Like her ancestors, William the Conqueror and Henry II, she was possessed of an iron will, which, once it had marked out an objective, was not easily turned aside. She liked to listen, rather than talk. And when she spoke, it was briefly and to the point. In order to understand the tremendous accomplishments of this unusual woman, and the tremendous role she played in changing the manifold destiny in the course of history, it is important to understand the times in which she lived. It is also important to understand the several centuries preceding her reign and the jeopardy in which the Mohammedan Moors and the Jews had not only placed Spain, but all of white Europe. We have already considered in a previous chapter how the Jews were instrumental in creating and promoting a new religion among the Arabs, and how in their diabolical cunning they were planning to wield a mighty Muslim empire and then use this new battering ram to invade, conquer and destroy white Europe. After the Muslims, by force of the sword, had conquered and converted all the Arab tribes along the northern shores of Africa to the gates of Gibraltar, it was the Spanish Jews who invited the Saracens to cross over into Spain. When in 709 the Saracens finally came, at the instigation of the African Jews, it was the Spanish Jews that were able to open the gates to the conquerors, and were rewarded by being made rulers of Granada, Seville and Cordova. In the new Muslim state, the Jews attained a brilliant height of prosperity and influence. This the Jews managed to accomplish even after the discovery that they were plotting to bring the Arabs from Africa to overthrow the Gothic kingdom, later Spain, and even after they were condemned to slavery, and even after their liberation they were repressed by the provisions of the strict Visigothic code. In spite of all this they prospered, and by the beginning of the 8th century they were so rich and powerful in all the principal cities of Spain that they were able to betray that unfortunate country and continue to open the gates further for the fanatic Moorish invaders. The gradual reconquest by the white Spaniards of the peninsula itself did not particularly disturb the Jews. When Saint Fernando recaptured Seville in 1224, he was foolish enough to give them 4 Moorish mosques to convert into synagogues. He allowed them one of the more pleasant sections of the city for their homes, and demanded only that they refrain from insulting the Christian religion and from making converts among the Christians. The Jews observed none of these conditions, of course, yet several of the later kings, especially those in need of money, showed them high favor, and Alfonso VIII made a Jew his treasurer. Here we see this eternal foolish weakness of the white kings, willingly collaborating with their deadly enemies, the Jews, and giving them financial powers to collect the taxes of their subjects. We see this very same sickness in America, in the last decade when we ourselves have had 2 Jewish directors of internal revenue, one by the name of Cohen and one by the name of Kaplan. Toward the end of the 13th century the Jews were so powerful in Spain that they had almost brought the Spanish reconquest of the Moors to an end. There must have been in all of Spain somewhere between 4 and 6 million Jews out of a total population of 25 to 30 million, in other words approximately 15 to 20% were Jews. There was, furthermore, at this time a program of subversion of the Christian doctrine by a group called the Albigenses, a sect, again created by the Jews, who taught outright self-destruction and suicide as a creed, a further perversion of the brain to speed the destruction of the white race. Even some non-Jews had themselves circumcised so that they might teach freely, as Jews, this heresy for which they might have been punished as Christians. Furthermore, the Catholic Church foolishly had always regarded usury as a sin, leaving the field of money lending wide open to the Jews, who thereby had a monopoly as the only bankers and moneylenders. Little by little the capital and commerce of the country passed into their hands. They generally charged 20% interest in Aragon and January 3, 33% in Castile. During the famine of 1326 they demanded 40% interest on money lent to the town of Cuenca to buy wheat. The citizen with taxes to pay, the farmer with no money to buy wheat for his planting, and the burgher held for ransom by robber baron, turned in desperation to the Jewish moneylender, and became his economic slave. By lending money to the kings, the Jews also acquired control of the government. The common people hated them because they often bought from the king the privilege of taxation, and mercilessly wrung all the money they could from the unfortunate citizens. Now and then the Spaniards reacted in a healthy, instinctive way. When things got too desperate, the citizens would simply rise up and massacre a good number of the Jews. In most cases the Pope would come to the defense of the Jews and do his utmost to stop the citizens in their righteous indignation from massacring the Jews, a further proof that Christianity was Jewish in its instigation and continues to be Jewish in its control from the central domination of the Pope himself. When the Black Death slew half the population of Europe in 2 years, the Jews suffered worse than the rest, for the desperate populace accused them of having caused the pestilence by poisoning the wells and commenced to slay them all over Europe. There is much evidence that the Jews did, in fact, drop infected people in wells and other sources of water in order to spread the plague and thereby kill off more of the white population. Pope Clement VI denounced these accusations against the Jews as lies, trying to point out that the plague had been just as deadly in lands where no Jews lived, although this was not easily proved or disproved. He further strongly threatened to excommunicate such people as took part in these massacres, calling them fanatics. Nevertheless, the Spaniards continued to kill the Jews. In Castile, in 1391, several thousand were massacred. As a result, many Jews seemingly embraced Christianity, and became known as conversos or Morenos. Thus came into being a new class of Jewish Christians, some of whom were seemingly sincere, but most of whom, while attending Mass on Sunday, secretly continued to attend the synagogue and to eat kosher food. Thus, as professing Christians, the secret Jews were now freed from the restrictions imposed upon their brothers of the synagogue, and could intermarry with any of the leading families of Spain. Furthermore, a new and highly important field was opened up to them, for as Christians they could now become priests, or dedicate their sons to the church to show their loyalty to their new religion, with the result that in Isabella's time, they controlled and exploited the Catholic Church in Spain to an astonishing degree. There were in Spain many Catholic priests who were secretly Jews and made a mockery of the Mass and of the sacraments they pretended to administer. One such priest, for example, never gave absolution when he heard confessions. The Spanish Catholics naturally resented these sacrileges bitterly, and for good reason blamed the Jews exclusively for the prevalent corruption in the Church. In fact, the old Christians, that is the Spaniards, detested the conversos even more than the Jews of the synagogue, whom they at least could identify. Many of these conversos made a mockery of the sacraments, and when they went to confession, they usually lied to the confessor. The Jews had Spain under their heel and were having a field day robbing and fleecing their victims. This was pretty much the situation politically and religiously in Spain when Isabella, at the age of 10, was being brought to the court of her half-brother, 26 years her senior. He was now Enrique IV, King of Castile. When Isabella's father had died, Enrique inherited the throne. Isabella was a beautiful girl of the fairer Nordic type, with light reddish hair, a determined chin, somewhat too large for her other features, and blue eyes in which there were greenish lights flecked with gold. She received a good education, not unlike the daughters of noblemen in Spain of that period. She had learned to speak Castilian musically and with elegance, and to write it with a touch of distinction. She studied grammar, rhetoric, painting, poetry, history, and philosophy. From her father she inherited a passionate love for music and for poetry, and from her tutors, who had studied at Salamanca University, she had learned much of the philosophy of Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas.